Support for this episode comes from Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you're at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacy. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
This week, creating a bihormonal pump using insulin and glucagon in one device has been the goal of Beta Bionics since before the company had that name. Now that they've launched the insulin-only version of the iLet, we're getting an update on the dual-chambered version. The big news here is a new agreement with Xeris, the makers of Gvoke HypoPen, to supply that shelf-stable glucagon. But there are still a lot of questions and a long way to go. We're talking to the CEOs of both companies. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. The story of this device is one that goes back a long way. And many of you, as you listen, have been part of what became the iLet, either early supporters of the creator, Ed Damiano, who really started talking about this and launched it, I believe, in 2002. Or maybe you were at the Friends for Life conference when he debuted what the device would look like and that it had the name iLet. I know some people who were involved in the early testing way back when. Even my son, Benny, the only clinical trial he ever got into was the human factors, the testing for the iLet pump. All of that to say, this is a story and a device that feels pretty personal to a lot of you as you listen. But if you are brand new to diabetes or to the podcast, welcome. I say that because there is some assumed knowledge about both the iLet and about Xeris, about the stable glucagon. But I think you should be able to easily follow along. If you're interested in more of the history, I have done previous episodes with both of these companies, including some in that very first year of the podcast back in 2015. So you can use the search bar over at diabetes-connections.com or just follow the links in the show notes. I will put links to those previous episodes on the episode homepage on our website, and they should appear in the show notes wherever you listen. My guests are Sean Saint, the CEO of Beta Bionics. He was diagnosed with type 1 as an adult, and then he founded Companion Medical, the company that developed and launched the InPen system. That was the first FDA-cleared smart pen. Sean was also an early employee at Dexcom and at Tandem. Paul Edick is the CEO of Xeris. He's held that position since 2017. He has extensive experience in healthcare and pharmaceutical companies. He was a founding partner of 3G Advisors, which consults to those kinds of firms, before he came to Xeris. Quick housekeeping note, Xeris is a sponsor of this podcast. You hear me read their ads every week. But as longtime listeners know, and I say this all the time, you know I like my disclaimers and disclosures. When you buy advertising on the show, you buy the advertising. You do not buy the content. This will be apparent in the interview pretty early on. Both Sean and Paul are very open to questions and gave me some very candid answers. But we don't give them all the questions in advance. We're not editing things out where I've crossed over some kind of line that we've agreed on. That's not the way it works around here. All right, our conversation right after this. When I think about our family's use of CGM and Dexcom, it's hard to remember how we did things before. Truly, how did we manage when Benny needed something like 10 finger sticks a day when he was a toddler? We thought it was amazing to switch to Dexcom when it needed to be calibrated 2 times a day. Now, Dexcom G6 eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. Benny's fingertips looked just awful when he was in elementary school. When they got wet, you could really see how pitted and scarred up they were from all those finger sticks. Now they're healthy and smooth, which I never thought would happen back then. He doesn't even remember. But to me, it's everything. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Paul Edict, Sean Saint, welcome to Diabetes Connections. Welcome back. It's great to talk to you. Lots to go through. I'm really glad you could spare some time to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thanks so much for having us, Stacey.
You got it. Let's lay out some of the basics of what happened here. And Paul, I'd like to start with you. Tell me about this agreement, what it means for the companies and for patients, high level.
Well, what it means for patients, most importantly, is the final piece of the puzzle in a closed loop system for glycemic control. I mean, that's been the holy grail for, decades, right? And in the short term, what it means is incremental focus on the need for the second hormone, incremental focus on the role that ready-to-use liquid glucagon can play. And, right now we have Gvoke, right? It's a rescue ready-to-use liquid glucagon. What's the future of ready-to-use liquid glucagon is in a closed-loop system for glycemic control. So I think it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's something that we've been talking about for many years, certainly. And Sean, let me ask you, I don't want to get too far ahead. Lots of questions about the practical side of this, but let me give you the opportunity to answer the same question, kind of high level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just say that, pumps have been getting better for years, but we believe the iLet system, our current insulin-only system, is really a next generation system over what's previously been offered. But we are approaching the edge of what you can do with insulin only. And I think adding glucagon to the system is an absolute game changer for reduction in burden going forward. We can do things with the system, including glucagon, that we've never been able to even consider with an insulin-only system. It's a different way to think about even closed-loop insulin delivery. An aid to outcomes to something that takes over your diabetes, we hope.
Sure. I think most people listening to this podcast are probably familiar with this bihormonal insulin pump and the idea here. But just in case, because unfortunately we've got new people in the community all the time, Sean, explain what we're talking about here. How this is like a stop and go within an insulin pump.
Absolutely. So I think of it personally as the gas and the brake, right? Insulin is the gas in your car, it brings your blood sugar down, but glucagon is the brakes. It brings your blood sugar back up again. You can drive a car without brakes, but it's a heck of a lot easier when you've got them. And that's what we're doing, adding glucagon in.
And another kind of a basic question for you, Paul. When we were introduced to the diabetes community 17 years ago, glucagon was it felt like a recipe. It was this red box, you mixed it up, you messed it up probably, and it seemed impossible to think about something to be used in an insulin pump. Can you tell us a little bit about why this is different? This is not a new product, or is it?
Yeah, it is. Importantly, we should all stop using the word glucagon by itself, because what we're really talking about and the innovation after decades of that stuff is room temperature stable, ready to use glucagon. So you can carry it around, you can put it in cartridges, you can put it in an auto injector for rescue, you can put it in a pre-filled syringe. The innovation, it has been, I don't have to reconstitute anymore, and it lasts for a long time, and I can carry it around. So the liquid ready-to-use glucagon, which is used in rescue in Gvoke HypoPen, and now in a pump for the glycemic control system, is the innovation. And Gvoke is one formulation, which is a rescue formulation, and a lot more glucagon at the end of the day in that formulation. And what we're building for the closed loop system is a different formulation of liquid, stable, ready-to-use glucagon.
Okay, that's exactly what I meant. And I apologize for not phrasing the question better, but this is a fake pen. I've got my trainer pen here. I've got the real, you'll be happy to know the real pen is with my son, the person with diabetes. So the stuff that goes in the real Gvoke HypoPen, slightly different. Tell me what you can about what will go into this pump.
It's just a different formulation of glucagon that's formulated to be specifically compatible with the components of the inner workings of a pump. In the Gvoke HypoPen, it's one little cartridge, and we structured the HypoPen so that it is compatible with the components in that. This is a different formulation that's compatible with the pump that Sean and the Beta Bionics team are building.
All right. I don't want to get too far in the weeds. But when you say,
there's not much further I can go in terms of...
I don't know. Some of my chemistry listeners are like, ask them about the formulation. When you say it's a different formulation, I mean, we're kind of used to, well, I shouldn't say it like that. When you're talking about formulation, like a different way to get it through the mechanism, or different in how the glucagon responds in the body?
Not different how the glucagon is glucagon. Okay, and it's going to respond in the body in the same way. It's going to be administered in very small doses, and it's going to sit around and be administered on occasion. That requires a little bit of a different formulation for the way it's going to just kind of sit around and a little bit at a time. The rescue, the Gvoke HypoPen, is a whole bunch of glucagon. When you're in trouble and you're going down, you need a pretty good hit to get it back up very quickly. Different application.
Perfect. So Sean, let me ask you, again, this is not something that's coming out tomorrow. This is something you all are working on. What would it look like, as much as you can tell us, right? What is this, a glucagon cartridge?
Yeah, it's as simple as that. So the iLet system uses a glass cartridge of insulin. We have both fill your own, as well as you can get pre-filled insulin cartridges, for example, with Fiesp in them. And this will just be a pre-filled glucagon cartridge. Our current iLet device is an insulin-only device, but within that system, inside that box, is actually room for the other channel. So that's as big as the system will be. One of the criticisms or concerns we've had in the past is, wow, isn't this thing going to be really, really big? The answer is no. It fits within our current pump today. So that's been solved. It's like the algorithm is there. We've done roughly 20 clinical trials on this over the years. It works. The remaining, domino that had to fall, as Paul alluded to earlier, is the existence of a drug that had, and to speak to the formulation, the concentration, the stability, and the compatibility to be able to work in our product. And we believe we have that now. But yeah, it's going to look very much like the iLet of today with, the infusion set remains to be determined a little bit, but yes, you can deliver them right next to each other, very nearly to each other. We have every belief that it's going to feel like one infusion set, but I'm looking into the future there and certainly not promising anything on that, but that's the intent. Right. So you should experience it much like a traditional pump today, except that you think less about your diabetes. And in fact, we love the quote, "I forgot I had diabetes."
I have a few more follow-up questions for you. But before we move on to more of the mechanics of it, Paul, let me go back and ask you, when you say the shelf stable, not having to be refrigerated, insulin only lasts in a pump for a couple days, right? We all know it degrades. You got to change it out. What's the life of glucagon in a pump?
I don't think we've gotten to the final stability profile. So whatever is necessary in the pump, we will formulate to that need.
So not to press too hard on this, but I said we're changing out insulin a lot. I think people would be comfortable with the idea of I got to change my glucagon when I change my insulin. But I think there's this feeling, right, that I'm going to not need it. I may not use it. And then I have this cartridge of glucagon that I'm maybe wasting. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but how long will it last?
Yeah, great question. So what we're doing here with bihormonal is not providing a full rescue dose of glucagon only when you need it. We're providing, like many people use the phrase microdosed glucagon. Most days you'll receive that. And if you look at somebody's blood sugar graph, we tend to get low every day. We'd like to prevent that. We'd like to not have you reach for your glucotabs or reach for the orange juice or the juice box or whatever it is. We'll take care of that for you. If you're reaching for food, it's because you're hungry and not because your blood sugar is getting low. So yeah, it's a different way to think about the dosing of glucagon from rescue to, a little bit every day. So the intent is, said another way, you're probably going to have used some of it during that, whatever the period is. We don't know yet, to Paul's point, but I'd like to see roughly double the insulin cartridge. So you change your insulin cartridge, say every 3 days, your glucagon cartridge every 6, something like that. But again, we're not there yet.
If you think about some of the data that's out on pumps in general, people tend to be low for some period of just about every single day. So you can imagine a system where you're getting a little bit of insulin when you need it. You're getting a little bit of liquid, stable, ready to use glucagon when you need it, right? It's not about rescue. Rescue is rescue. This is everyday glycemic control. And the two will live together very nicely because you'll still have all kinds of people who still need rescue, and you'll have people on the pump that are going to need rescue less.
I'm so glad I asked this question because it shows where so many of us are right now. It did not occur to me, even though we're talking about it as stop and go and you'll use it. In my brain, I really was thinking of these, my son with type 1 needing only the rescue glucagon. But of course, he's been home from college for just a couple of days now. And the first night, second night he was home, he didn't wake me up. But in the middle of the night, he was low, came downstairs, drank half the juice that's in the fridge and went back to bed. It wasn't an emergency. Perfect example of when something like that would kick in. It's going to be, we'll talk again, I'm sure, but what an interesting challenge I think newer people who are diagnosed will totally understand, right? It's like giving somebody an AID pump and them saying, how did you do this with a dumb pump years ago? So changing the mindset. I'm glad I asked because it just illustrated I wasn't thinking about it in that way at all. So Sean, let me go back to what you said. I know, again, much of this is what you'd like to see happen. None of this is here, we're handing you the device today. So I think it's okay to set those parameters. And as you listen, please understand some of these questions are not promises, are not even, I don't have a piece of paper in front of me saying this is what's going to happen. But when you mentioned the infusion set, you really got my attention because we've seen years ago the Beta Bionics iLet trials where these kids were wearing 2 infusion sets and basically had 2 pumps. Now we've got 1 pump. I'm stunned to hear you say as close as you can get maybe to 1 infusion set. So can you flesh that out a little bit more for us? Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Beta Bionics was fundamentally founded. In fact, the work that Beta Bionics was founded on was done for years before that, primarily based on bihormonal. And when we started that work, you got to ask yourself, how can we test out if bihormonal glucose control works? And one of the things to do is not necessarily develop a single infusion set. That's a user experience preference and improvement that can be added later. So we never tried. We used 2 infusion sets. We used 2 pumps in certain cases in order to do the early trials that proved that fundamentally bihormonal glucose control can work and does work, in fact. One of the evolutions we need to bring to make it a reality for people is, I think, a single infusion set. That'll be a vast improvement. One is a single box, right? We have that today. Another is shelf-stable glucagon. So you're not reconstituting and filling every day. And it's an unreasonable patient experience. So I think what's characterized Beta over the years is knocking down these challenges one after the other. And I think that this one, finally with Xeris's help, is really the last technological challenge that had to be knocked down before we can meaningfully execute on bringing the bihormonal system to people. The infusion set is, yes, it's a challenge. It's a technical path we need to walk, but you can do that.
I love to hear that. Do you mind, let's push forward a little bit on that. Let's kind of dial in on that. When I think about a dual cannula infusion set or a dual infusion set, right?
Sure.
You think about when they tell us with continuous glucose monitoring and insulin infusion sets, they want it to be 3 inches apart, wire to wire. Mm-hmm. My son would take a 3 inches apart, gigantic infusion set if it meant he only had to change one. Obviously, they have to be changed at different times for continuous glucose monitor, so it wouldn't work. I mean, is something like that a possibility? Not ideal.
We're definitely in the realm of we don't know yet because the FDA is going to opine on this subject. But, and Paul, please check me on this. In the case of CGM, right, you're infusing one drug that could dilute a CGM measurement, making the CGM wrong, right? So you don't necessarily want those. And by the way, we don't really know how close those can be. I was at Dexcom in 2003 when we started that, and it was like, let's move them 3 inches apart. But with this, we're talking about 2 hormones, and I'm not aware of any technological reason that they can't be delivered right next to one another. Paul?
Yeah, so I'm not a device guy, but I've been dealing with the FDA for decades. They're going to want to see, how do the drugs work? Okay, does the system work drug and drug? And does the delivery of the individual insulin and the individual glucagon work relative to glycemic control? Then you're going to get the device division that's going to say, well, how is that going through the device? And I think one of the challenges of a single route of administration, one infusion set, with insulin going in at one point and glucagon going in at another point, is going to be a challenge. So whether or not you can get to that, because you can envision they're going to say, okay, well, wait a second. Insulin just went through there. Now you're going to put some glucagon through there. What happens when the two kind of interact? So a dual infusion set may be necessary. I'm not a device guy again, so I don't know. I just know the FDA is going to look at every single aspect of this. We're going to assist on the drug side. Beta Bionics is going to have to figure out the device side. Sean, is that reasonably accurate?
100% accurate. There's no question they're going to want to opine on that subject. I think I know the tests that we want to do, at least loosely, to prove that. But for this point, at this early stage, I think I'll leave it with, I don't actually know of any reason why it won't work. But he's right. We've got a ton of work to do to prove that.
So interesting to think about. A couple of quick questions away from the pump. I'm going to come back, certainly. But Paul, let me ask you, a lot of my listeners are very interested in mini glucagon dosing. This is something that's obviously being built into this pump, but it's not something that is generally available. I know diabetes camps like it for stomach bugs. I have a friend who was a medical director of a camp. It was a fabulous thing a few years ago when everybody got sick at that camp. Any plans to have a device or, something like a pen or anything that could do mini doses? Xeris is not approved. No product is approved to do that by the FDA. So I'm not even sure you can talk about it.
Yeah, I can't talk about it in a promotional sense. I can talk about it in a conceptual manner and some of the work that we've done historically. Let me start with the glycemic control system that we're talking about today. You will have a system that is, in its own way, mini dosing the liquid ready-to-use glucagon. It will be. What we have on the market today available for use is the Gvoke HypoPen, the prefilled syringe, and there's a vial and syringe version as well that are used for and dosage for and indicated for, etc., rescue, okay? Because it's got a dosage that is appropriate for rescue because you're going really low. You could be on the verge of unconsciousness. You need to get your glucose level up quickly. That's what that does. In between, there are all these other things that people want to do. And our Gvoke version of glucagon is facilitative of that, but we can't promote it in that way because it's never been really studied for the purpose of prevention, okay? If you remember, or you've probably seen, we've studied smaller doses in different indications, like exercise-induced hypoglycemia, benign BPH or HAF and other things, with the objective going to the FDA and recommending a phase 3 program for prevention of hypoglycemia. It's something that the FDA can't conceive of. It's never been studied that way. So the kinds of trials that they asked us to do were way too big, way too expensive for the potential return. It just would make no sense for us to do it. Congenital hypoglycemia, hyperinsulinemia.
Yeah.
Say that 3 times fast. They actually wanted us on infants, newborns, to do placebo-controlled trial. There's no way on earth you're going to do that. So we offered our glucagon for those patients for continuous infusion. We'll give it to them for free for life because it just doesn't make any sense to do it. So long story short, there is a lot of that in between. There's a lot of different ways you can. Actually studying it and getting an indication is just incredibly difficult.
I really appreciate you taking the question. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, all I'm saying is this may be a route to good clinical data around a frequency of dosing on an interim basis of small amounts that could get us some additional information in those areas. Sorry for the long-winded.
It's a wonderful answer, and I appreciate you addressing it. It really is so interesting. And we've had people on the show with hyperinsulinism. I'm not going to say that right either.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's incredible to think about infants. So thanks for addressing that. Sean, I have a question. I feel like it's a little bit rude to bring up with Paul in the room, but I will ask it anyway. A couple of years ago, you guys announced an agreement with Zealand and a different type of glucagon.
That's not rude.
Yep.
Okay.
We acknowledge that. We've talked.
You're
about
here.
it. Yeah.
It's like the ex-girlfriend. I don't want to bring up, But
you might not be the first girlfriend, but the one you.
But my question is is this demonstrably different? What happened? If you can share anything.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the details of the different relationships. I think what I will say is that, at this point, I think Xeris has a great technology that we're really excited to partner with. and they were willing to do a deal with us that was, exactly what we were looking for, that ultimately involves a license to the product. And this deal looked really good for us. So we decided to walk that road. No criticisms, no problems in any other direction, but I don't want to go into the detailed history of it. But all the credit to Xeris for working with us in a productive manner. So thanks for that.
And I think that's fair. I just wanted to clarify that the product itself, because I haven't heard anything about Zealand's.
They're very different in many regards. We have glucagon on the Xeris side and dasiglucagon on the Zealand side. Completely different excipient profiles, completely different stability methods. They both raise blood sugar, but beyond that, they're quite a bit different. I'm not qualified to talk about the detailed differences, of course.
Yeah, and the relationship is Beta Bionics topic. It's not for us to talk about. We were on the sidelines, and if that works, great. It's good for patients. Happy to see it. In long-term glycemic control. If we're a good alternative, then let's do something. So.
I'll be honest with you all, and I think my listeners know this after all this time. I'm less interested in the business. You guys can go on CNBC and talk about that if you want to. I just want to know what the patient is going to see and feel and experience. So if you're telling me, if it's a business deal, that's one thing. If it's a product thing, that's another thing altogether. So that's why I wanted to ask.
Patients going to be well taken care of.
I would say that what we're doing is the fastest path to market of that we believe we can provide.
All right, let's talk about the path to market. I know no one's going to talk to me about timing, but Sean, the iLet is in the world. I've been talking to Ed Damiano about this, I don't know, since Ed Damiano was talking about this. So it's wonderful to see, I know people who use it, right? It's great to see it out there. I guess before I ask about any kind of timeline, let me just check in. You're getting real world data now. It's been a while since you and I talked. I hate to give you a question like, how's it going? But at the same time, I assume we're going to hear more about this over the summer at these conferences. Studies are coming out.
Absolutely. No, I think how's it going is the natural question at this stage. And I'm not sure how many superlatives I can use, but it's going great. The feedback has been, primarily tremendous. We are really proving that there is a way to manage your insulin with lower impact or lower burden than we previously have done. We're really looking forward to starting to share some of our post-market data, as we've been able to see that. Thrilled with that. It's really going very well. And then, to your point, not a bit of a business answer, sales are good. This is what we needed to see. If you want to have an impactful product, then you must actually sell units of that product so people can use it. And we're doing that and we're getting the feedback. So we're pretty happy right now. We are continuing to educate the world that it's not just another insulin pump. And I think it's natural unless you really listen to us say, there's another pump out there. Yeah, this is a next generation pump. It represents a different way of thinking about blood sugar management, right? If you think about that, we don't use words like bolus, basal, correction, units, carbs. Those words are not in our product. You don't have to think about your insulin delivery. You do have to think about your blood sugar, though. If it is low or trending low, you want to think about that. So that's one difference. And that's the next evolution that the bihormonal represents. So we're trying to think into the future and ultimately disrupt ourselves.
Yeah. As you are moving ahead with the tests that you have to do and everything you need to move ahead with the bihormonal pump, is there a look at type 2 in all of this?
I think you have to be considering type 2 for a couple different things. Number one, pumps not well utilized in type 2 today, but there's probably reasons for that can be addressed and I think are largely addressable by iLet. And then beyond that, into the bihormonal, I think a point Paul would make is that, look, if they're on insulin, then, glucagon generally is certainly a likely need. So we don't have the data as of yet in the type 2 space to know exactly what that'll look like. But I think we do have the data in the type 2 space to say, turns out they get low too.
So these next set of studies that you're going to be doing to try to bring the dual hormone pump to market will not involve people with type 2 or other types of diabetes, or yes?
I'm not sure. I'll leave that as a to be answered.
Okay, excellent.
Like legitimately don't know. It's not that I'm not answering. I don't know.
It's an interesting question as we see more pump makers kind of move into the type 2 space. All right. So I won't ask you about timelines directly because I know you don't have one, but what is the next step here?
We are actively engaged with Xeris right now to finish the formulation on the product to make sure we've got the exact formulation of the drug that we think will best serve, the pump, the patients, et cetera. And after that, we'll be moving into phase 2 and phase 3 trials to ultimately get all the data that we need for the agency. You're right. We're not going to share dates exactly. We will acknowledge that phase 2 and phase 3 trials are big and expensive and long. That's unfortunate. So we'll make a commitment to moving through them as fast and as efficiently as we possibly can, because it is an important innovation that we want to get out there as fast as possible.
I would add that the formulation piece, from a timing perspective, we need to get that done expeditiously. So, the goal is to have that this year.
Something, again, I don't think you can answer, but I'm curious if you have a mind to this. When you get an insulin pump, and I was amazed by this when Benny was 2.5 and we got ours, there's so much that goes with it. You're getting the pump, you're getting the infusion sets, you're getting the cartridges, you're getting the insulin, you're now getting the glucagon and the cartridges. Again, it's very far out, so I know there's not a real answer to this. But is there a thought to how this will be packaged together in terms of affordability?
Yeah, we're constantly attempting to make the products as affordable as we possibly can. And in terms of reimbursement, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But the more you can package things together under a single copay, the more affordable it is for patients. I'll add that on average, if you're covered under your pharmacy plan for iLet today, I believe that's the cheapest form on average of automated insulin delivery you can be on today. And that's obviously the goal with this as well, is to not massively increase patient costs. We need to be thinking that way.
Another question I had about the iLet is, since the last time we talked, any changes in CGM compatibility?
Since last time we talked, absolutely. We launched with G6. We are now G7 compatible, and we will continue to look at other compatibilities as they become available and make sense. But we ultimately believe in patient choice, of course.
Sean, I was looking through my notes. And, Eversense just got approved as an iCGM, which means they can be used in these AID systems. And Beta Bionics in 2018 had a deal with Eversense. Is that something that's still alive? I mean, that's a long time ago.
I've not been here that long. I've been here since 22. So I can't comment on the details of that exact deal. What I will say is we're very respectful of what Senseonics has done. Certainly, that's the only implantable CGM out there. It's really impressive work what they've done. And now getting iCGM is an important milestone for them. And it really does make it possible that we can include it in systems like ours. So we'll absolutely be analyzing that as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting product. When my son was a wrestler in high school, he was like, if it was compatible with something, man, he wanted that implantable. Because I don't know if you guys, wrestling is gross. And it's just terrible for diabetes devices.
My daughter's a wrestler.
Your daughter? Yeah, I mean, imagine, right?
Yeah.
No offense. It's a wonderful sport. Good for her. It's disgusting.
Well, oddly, there was a girl at her last tournament that had an arm wrap going on, and I was like, type 1? She's like, oh yeah. And it was like this thick arm wrap thing that
our
she had
state champion in a weight class is type 1. And he hid it under his short. He did it. My son would just have them all hair flying off. We had a ref who had one, had a T-Slim. It was great.
One of the things that I get asked a lot, and not just, even investors, because we're a public company, is what does this mean for the rescue category? What does it mean for rescue? What does it mean for Gvoke HypoPen?
Right.
And I answer that with several components. One being, we've got 15 million people on insulin and sulfonylureas. Only 1 million fill a prescription for a rescue Gvoke HypoPen. Okay, think about that first. First and foremost, there's millions of people at risk who should have a ready-to-use rescue glucagon such as Gvoke HypoPen. That's number one. Number two, the more we get comfortable with Gvoke in the rescue vernacular, in the rescue version, and carrying it around, the more people will begin to understand and be open to the closed loop glycemic control of what Sean and Beta Bionics are building. So they aren't opposed to one another. They go hand in hand. And the future of the use of ready-to-use glucagon is not just rescue. And you need this, or you're never going to have a closed loop system.
I love what Paul just brought up, and I think it cuts both ways in that if this agreement and if the work that we're doing together now at all puts a renewed focus on rescue glucagon and gets that 1 million prescriptions up where it should be, which is probably to 15 million, frankly, that is a wonderful thing. It's a great technology. We've had it a long time and not enough people use it. And technologies like Gvoke are helping to expand that, of course. But if what we're doing here expands it even further, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
And Sean, let me ask you, before I just kind of wrap it up here, you mentioned you working at Dexcom back in the day. You live with type 1. I'm going to assume you wear a Beta Bionics pump. Okay.
I certainly have.
Okay.
I wear everything is the problem. So
okay.
Today I'm not, but I've on and on of it.
Well, then let me rephrase the question.
I got to try everything.
No, I think that's great. All right. Let me rephrase the question. What are you most optimistic about? I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
What still gets you jumping out of bed in the morning?
Well, look, fundamentally, what I've always wanted, and by the way, I wasn't diagnosed in 2011, so I was in the industry almost a decade when I got diagnosed myself.
Yes.
But what I've always worked toward is decreasing burden. And I hope that's, central to all of the things I've worked on, from Dexcom to Tandem to Companion and it's really that. In this case, we're doing that two ways. The iLet, I think, fundamentally reduces burden, and the bihormonal system will reduce it significantly farther. But look, I'm telling you what you already know. Diabetes is a constant struggle. And the idea that we can meaningfully impact people's lives that way, and the number of people's lives we can, absolutely gets me out of bed every day. That's why I took this job, in fact.
Great. Well, Sean and Paul, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure we will follow up and we will learn more over the conferences this summer. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks
so much.
Thanks for having us.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I am probably going to see both of those guys and their companies at the ADA conference coming up in June. So let me know if you've got any more questions. I'm happy to ask them for you. I will be posting in the Facebook group, actually, as we get closer to ADA, because, gosh, I went last year for the first time, and I went less for the podcast and more to just kind of see what it was all about. And now that I have my footing, because it is as huge as everybody says, it is quite overwhelming. But I feel like I can go in with my recorder now and do a little bit more. I've got my press pass, that kind of thing. I'd love to know what you want me to focus on, because I could go in many, many different directions. It's a huge, huge event. And one funny thing, Paul Edick, I didn't see this in his bio before we talked, but he went to Hamilton College. And that is right down the road from where I had my first job in Utica, New York. I lived very close to Hamilton College. I was in New Hartford, New York. If anybody is familiar with that area, shout out to Shopping Town Mall. Maybe you're more familiar with Turning Stone Casino, which is between Syracuse and Utica. But I have very fond memories of that area in upstate New York. It is, of course, where I had my first job. And then a little bit later, it's where I met my husband. So I definitely got to follow up with Paul, and we could definitely talk shop about upstate New York and that area around Hamilton College. Such a small world. My weekly reminder that Mom's Night Out registration is open for Denver, and Philadelphia is opening. Might be open as you're listening. I think probably just a couple more days to go, but head on over to the Mom's Night Out page on diabetes-connections.com. That's listed as events or Mom's Night Out. Pretty easy to find, and you can sign up for city-specific events or alerts or register for Denver. Thanks, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
Managing diabetes doesn't need to get in the way of your passion, your social life, or your budget. EdgePark can help you simplify your diabetes journey so you can focus on other important things. EdgePark offers a wide array of continuous glucose monitors, such as the Dexcom G7, Freestyle Libre 3, and more. Plus, EdgePark accepts most insurance plans and handles the paperwork. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the EdgePark logo to learn more.